No one is ever really fine. We just learn to pretend, to hold ourselves together long enough so no one sees the cracks. You wake up at 6 a.m., pour cold coffee, sit in traffic for 2 hours and call it life. But you know, deep down, it's not living, it's enduring. Have you ever wondered why everyone seems too busy to think? Why silence feels dangerous? Because thinking means stopping, and stopping means facing the truth we've all been avoiding since childhood. Everything will end. So why does anything exist at all? Peter Wessel Zapffe, a Norwegian philosopher, dared to answer that question. He didn't romanticize life, he dissected it, and what he found was terrifying. Consciousness is a mistake, a defect of nature. We are the only animals cursed with the knowledge of our own death, and we must live as if that knowledge doesn't eat us alive. To survive, humanity invented lies, beautiful lies, necessary lies. Zapffe called them defenses against reality. 4 psychological mechanisms designed not to find truth, but to protect us from it. This video is about those lies, the 4 illusions that hold your life together, and if you're brave enough to keep watching, you'll see how they keep you alive, but never free. You know you're going to die. No other animal carries that knowledge, but you do, every single day. And that's not just a fact, it's a burden. The starting point of a tragedy that defines the human condition. To Norwegian philosopher Peter Wessel Zapffe, consciousness wasn't a blessing, it was an evolutionary glitch. Consciousness is a mistake, a defect of nature. Nature gave us the capacity to reflect, imagine, dream, but it didn't give us the tools to survive what we would eventually see. That everything ends, that love fades, that meaning is not given, only invented. Unlike other species, we don't just live, we know we live. And we know just as clearly that one day we won't. Death isn't a moment that waits at the end. It's the foundation under every second. And when that awareness breaks through, when we see existence not as a gift but as a silent abyss, inner peace doesn't disappear, it gets shattered. But here's the cruel twist. It's not just death we fear life itself, the randomness, the silence, the unbearable possibility that we're here for no reason at all. Zapffe called this terror cosmic panic, a quiet existential horror that doesn't come from pain or trauma, but from seeing too clearly, from realizing the universe doesn't care, and maybe never did. And because we can't live in that awareness for long, we've built defenses, not to find the truth, but to avoid collapsing under it. To live is to suffer. To understand is to suffer consciously. To understand too much is to risk breaking. So we lie, beautifully, desperately. We lie to ourselves and call it stability. And from those lies, 4 great illusions were born. Isolation, anchoring, distraction, sublimation, not solutions but masks, not cures, but coping mechanisms that keep the human machine running even when the soul is breaking. And now we're going to see each one for what it truly is. But consciousness doesn't just hurt, it threatens to tear us apart. Once we realize the full weight of existence, once we glimpse what Zapffe called the cosmic panic, our minds are pushed to the edge. And to stop ourselves from falling into the abyss, we created the first lie, the first defense, isolation. Zapffe called it the most widespread yet the most brutal, because to use it we must cut off parts of ourselves, silence thoughts that scream too loud, bury feelings that threaten the surface. We amputate the truth to keep functioning. The mechanism of isolation is a fully arbitrary dismissal from consciousness of all disturbing and destructive thought and feeling. Think of it, how often do we talk about death at dinner? How many children ask about dying only to be met with silence? They stop asking not because they understand, but because they see that no one wants to answer. The lesson is clear. Don't speak of the abyss, smile instead. In society, it's the same. If someone breaks down crying in the street, do we ask, "Are you okay?" No, we call the police, not because they're dangerous, but because they broke the pact, the unspoken agreement that says, don't let anyone see the truth. So we go on, we laugh, we work, we scroll, but the connection to our inner depths, the place where truth lives, is gone. We become functioning corpses, smiling just enough to blend in. This isn't living, it's psychological paralysis, a life anesthetized. And over time, as Zapffe warned, we don't just play dead, we become it. We become the smiling dead. You think you chose your values, but you didn't. You didn't choose your country. You didn't design your flag. You didn't invent your God. These ideas weren't discovered, they were injected into you, passed down like heirlooms, wrapped in the illusion of choice. Zapffe called this anchoring, the human need to fix ourselves to something stable in a world that offers no foundation. We plant our identities in family, in nation, in faith, in legacy, not because they are true, but because they stop us from floating in the void. Chaos terrifies us, so we tell stories, build myths, recite creeds. You call it identity, purpose, morality. He called it a survival mechanism. Anchoring is giving meaning to what has none. But what happens when the anchors crack, when the marriage ends, when the church fails you, when the ideals collapse? The real pain isn't just loss, it's the moment you realize you lived for something that was never real. A role, a script, a comforting lie. People kill for these anchors, die for them. Parents raise children to repeat patterns they never questioned. Soldiers give their lives for flags they never chose. Lovers lose themselves in fairy tales, and the world calls this noble. But truth doesn't ask for loyalty, it just waits. And most of us never face it because it's easier to obey a story than to admit we're walking in circles, chained to a belief that was never ours. Anchors don't save you, they stop you from drowning. Yes, but also from seeing the ocean. And eventually the question appears, is this belief mine, or just a cage with a beautiful name? But what happens when the anchors slip, when the myth cracks, when the flag burns, when the faith dies and the family breaks and the old stories no longer soothe? You don't scream, you scroll, because when anchoring fails, distraction takes over. Zapffe saw it coming long before we called it the attention economy. Distraction is the final line of defense, not against boredom, but against truth. We don't run from life, we run from the moment we might finally see it for what it is. So we binge watch another series, we check notifications mid-conversation, we worship productivity, not for progress, but for numbness dressed in ambition. You're not bored with life, you just haven't sat still long enough to realize you're living it wrong. Eternity didn't kill meaning. It buried it beneath 1,000 dopamine hits. TikTok, deadlines, group chats, email, self-improvement, all engineered to keep you busy so you never have to stop, because stopping is dangerous. When the noise dies, after a breakup, a job loss, a prison sentence, or a night when the silence gets too heavy, the truth returns like a wave of nausea. That old, familiar emptiness you've been drowning in blue light and background music. And when all the apps crash, when there's no one left to talk to and nothing left to scroll, you face the abyss, raw, unfiltered, undistracted. Some don't make it back from that place, because distraction wasn't just entertainment, it was anesthesia. And now the pain has woken up. When distraction fails, when the noise runs out and the silence finally wins, you have two choices: collapse or create. And that's where sublimation begins. Zapffe called it the most intelligent, the most beautiful, and the most tragic of all defenses. Because sublimation doesn't deny the pain. It uses it. It turns suffering into art, into poetry, into philosophy. It transforms despair into something the world can look at without breaking. A wound that never heals can still write a masterpiece. That's what Van Gogh did. That's what Sylvia Plath did. That's what Kurt Cobain did. They painted, they wrote, they sang their agony into something immortal. They turned pain into gold, but they didn't survive the alchemy. Sublimation is humanity's most elegant lie, because it doesn't hide the abyss. It frames it, it hangs it in a gallery and calls it beauty. It lets us believe that if we can describe our suffering beautifully enough, maybe it wasn't meaningless after all. But beneath the melody, beneath the metaphor, the pain is still there, breathing, burning, unchanged. The poet bleeds so you can applaud. The painter collapses so you can feel. The philosopher suffers so you can understand, without ever having to face what they faced. Zapffe saw through it. He knew that even art, even genius, is another survival trick, a way to rearrange despair until it looks like hope. We sublimate because we cannot destroy suffering, he wrote. We transform tragedy into expression, into language, into art. It doesn't save us, it merely distracts us beautifully. And maybe that's all art ever was, despair in disguise, a scream polished until it sounds like a song. But what happens when even sublimation fails? When the art no longer heals, when philosophy becomes just another performance, when the applause grows quiet and the pain still lingers beneath every word? Zapffe believed there was only one honest path left: antinatalism, not as rebellion, not as despair, but as the final act of compassion. Know yourself, be infertile, and let the earth be silent. No more births, no more consciousness, no more suffering echoing through time. Zapffe didn't hate life. He understood it too clearly, and in that clarity, he saw that the only way to stop the bleeding was to not pass the wound forward. To bring children into a world cursed with awareness, only for them to relive the same agony. He saw that not as creation, but as repetition of harm. He called for a quiet, voluntary exit, a graceful fading, not a violent end. In The Last Messiah, Zapffe imagines a figure, not a savior in light, but a prophet in shadow, who sees reality without illusion and dares to whisper the forbidden truth. But mankind doesn't listen. We bury him alive with our own fingernails because some truths are too sharp to hear. So we go on lying because the alternative, silence, feels like defeat. But maybe silence is the only peace left. To not continue the cycle isn't weakness, it's mercy. And sometimes the most radical love is to stop. Peter Wessel Zapffe never promised peace. He didn't offer healing, purpose, or a roadmap to happiness. Instead, he gave us something more dangerous and more honest: a mirror, held steady without distortion. What he saw, and what few dare to say, is that much of what keeps us going isn't truth, but survival instinct. We isolate pain, we anchor to borrowed beliefs, we distract ourselves endlessly. We turn suffering into beauty, not to transcend it, but to make it tolerable. And yet, for those who feel like something's wrong, like the world is asking them to smile while something deeper aches, Zapffe doesn't offer comfort, but recognition, a rare kind of relief, the kind that comes from knowing you're not alone in your doubt, your despair, or your disillusionment. In an age where meaning is mass-produced and despair is taboo, Zapfe's clarity is not a solution, but a confrontation. And maybe, for some, that confrontation is the first step, not toward joy, but toward acceptance of life's chaos, of mortality, of being human without needing to be hopeful. Now, this philosophy won't fix you, but it might help you see clearly, and from that clarity, something stronger than hope can emerge. Awareness, responsibility, even peace. Not because everything will be okay, but because you're awake enough to live without needing it to be. If you've made it this far, thank you. That alone means something. For more unfiltered, existential truths that don't shy away from the hard questions, subscribe to the channel, because truth needs company, and courage always begins with conversation.